So we'll start again. Take-home quiz, good old Ann. Number one, by the way, I'm going to cut corners because we've got a lot to do and I don't want to leave you with a zillion piles of homework. So I'm, unlike normal, not going to show all of my work. 29 kilometers, 1 mark. Displacement, I will draw a quick compass rose here. And I think if I do that, I'm going to have 11 north plus 18 east. I want to add these together. Gilun, how am I going to draw them? Tip to tail. So you can either draw it 11 and then 18, or you can draw it 18 then 11. You'll get the same magnitude, and you'll get the complement of the angle. Since I drew the 11 first, I'll draw it first. 11, 18. Here is the displacement. If I do the Pythagoras real quick, it's going to be 11 squared plus 8 square root. 21.1 kilometers. That gets you 1 mark. At. Now I need a direction. Theta goes there. Opposite. Adjacent. It's going to be shift tan. You know what? I'll call it 9 degrees. You could go 58.6. I'm going to go 59 degrees. What of what? North of south, east of west, what of what? I think that is east of north. I would also accept 90 take away 59, 31 degrees north of east. For 2 marks, I would give you 1 mark for the magnitude, a half mark for the theta, and a half mark for the what of what. B. Motorboat question. Boat heads due east at 16 meters per second across the river that flows due north at 8 meters per second. So the river flows north. That means if I draw a little picture, the river is going to flow vertically. There's the current, 8. And the boat is heading due east at 16. I want the resultant velocity. Matteo, I'd like to add these together. Any thoughts on how I might want to draw these? You don't say, really? I'm going to go 16 plus 8 just because the 16 showed up first in the question. If you went 8 plus 16, that's also going to give you the same answer. Yoink. 16. Yoink. 8. There is the velocity. It's going to end up being, as a magnitude, 16 squared plus 8 squared square root. 17.9 meters per second. At, there's angle theta, opposite, adjacent, shift tan. Is it always shift tan? Often. When isn't it shift tan if the resultant isn't the hypotenuse? We looked at a couple of weird ones where that was the case. Shift tan of 8 over 16. I'll call that 26.5. I'll call it 27 degrees. If you went 26.6, that's fine. I'm going to go 27 degrees. North of south, east of west, what of what? Mine is north of east. So I would also accept 90 minus 27, 63 degrees east of north. Same as before, Shana, 1 mark, half mark for the theta, half mark for the angle. And now let's do some application-y questions. If the river is 155 meters wide, 155 meters wide is that distance there. Which velocity am I going to use? The same direction. So I can use d equals vt, t equals d over v. The reason we have d equals vt, it's really d equals vt plus a half at squared, but I said no acceleration, so it's going to be 155 divided by 16. not divided by 8, not divided by 17.9, divided by 16. .69 seconds if I go to 3 sig figs. 1 mark, because apparently that's what I made that worth. How far downstream? Well, how far downstream? That's this distance here. So I'm going to use the 8 in line with that distance. Distance is going to be VT, which V? 8. Which T? 9.69, although I'm going to use my answer button. You get 77.5 meters. 1 mark. Turn the page. A force of 140 newtons pushes 67 degrees west of north. West of what? North. West of what? North. West of what? North. To draw this, I'm going to start out going north. I'm going to go west of north. How many degrees? 67. Yeep. Yoink. 140 newtons. This is 67 degrees. Find the horizontal and vertical components. Here's the vertical component. I'll call it Fy because it's a force. Here's the horizontal component. I'll call it Fx. Opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. Which trig function am I going to use to find the horizontal component? Yeah. It's going to end up being sine of 67 equals Fx over 140. Derek, how would I get the Fx by itself? Which one? Divide or times? Times by 140? I'm going to just not even bother writing that. I'm going to go 140. What? I'm going to go 140 sine 67. You get 128.8, 129 newtons. Now, you could call that negative. I didn't really ask for a direction. You could call that west. If you did, I'm not taking marks off. I'm really just looking, can you get the 129? Hey, which trig function am I going to use to find Fy? Cos. In fact, I think it's going to end up being almost the same thing. I think Fy is going to end up being 140 cosine 67. Do the trig. And I get 54.7, is that right? And again, you could call that north. You could call that up. I really didn't ask for a direction. I said break it into components. Mr. Dueck. What, Mateo? Who drew that amazingly artistic picture? Well, I did. Well, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Although for some reason I pointed the sled that way, I'm going to redraw this as though the sled is being pulled up and right, because that's typically how we have things going. Whichever way, you're going to get the same magnitudes no matter what. Apparently, it makes an angle of 72 degrees with the ground, and it's 117 newtons. It's slanty. This is a job for components. It's a force. I'll call it Fx. Fy. Opposite. Come here. Come here. Hypotenuse. Adjacent. I think to find Fx, cosine. Cosine of 72 equals Fx over 117. How would I get the Fx by itself? Times by 117. I'm going to get a horizontal component of, you get 36.15, that there, is that right? Yeah, I'll go 36.2. Cassidy, which trig function is Fy going to be? Tis. In fact, I think it's going to end up being 117 times the sine of 70. You've started to notice, hopefully it gets a bit repetitive with pattern. Good. So I'm going to say Fy is going to be 117 sine 72, which I can just kind of backspace and edit on my calculator, turn the cos into a sine. 111 newtons. 1 mark, 1 mark. Is that right? Yeah. Last one. Hiker walks 25.6 kilometers at an angle of 65 degrees south of east. South of what? East. South of what? East. South of what? East. Looks like I'm going to start going east. What of east? 65 degrees to the south. Something like that. There's the vector. And it's apparently 25.6 long. That angle there is 65 degrees. Is it slanty, Gilles? Yes, it's a job for components. Here is, I guess it's a distance. I'll call it dx and dy. Hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. Which trig function? You know what? I think it's going to end up being, I think dx is going to end up being the hypotenuse times the cosine of the angle. Have you spotted that kind of repeating over and over trend? If you're good, go ahead. 25.6 cos 65. I get 10.8. And it's kilometers. I think dy is going to end up being sine. It's going to end up being 25.6 sine of 65. And I get 23.2 kilometers. 1 mark, 1 mark. If you would be so kind as to give yourself a score at the top of the page out of, count 'em, 13. And then if words, and please make sure the person in the middle puts them in a nice stack, make sure their name is on it, and I'll come grab them. So if you want to get out the last day's lesson where we left off. So lesson 5, we got to example 9. Right here. We had, I think I had told you on your test there was going to be probably 4 written questions, and then 3 of them were going to be projectiles. Horizontally from a cliff, that's probably the easiest, because when you launch horizontally, your Vy initial is 0, and I'm good with my 0 times table. Hey Nick, what's 0 times 10? What's 0 times a million? What's 0 times a cajillion? What's 0 times infinity? Ooh, he didn't hesitate. So you can expect one of those. You can also expect something like number 9. What's the difference between this velocity and this velocity? This one here is slanty. Did I say slanty? This is a job for, I'm looking for a word that begins with letter C and rhymes with components. Okay? If you give me a slant, I'm never going to, by the way, I'm going to take that 100, I'm going to break it up, and I'm never going to use that 100 meters per second, sorry, that way, 100 meters per second again. Never going to use it. Okay? That's a common mistake. Kids want to put the slanty velocity into their workings later on. No, you don't want to. So this wants us to find 3 things: time to top, total flight time, and range. First thing, before I even go that, it's slanty, break it up into components, and I'm going to do the components. I think I got room on the side here. So I'm going to go like this. D, 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 D. There is Vx. D, 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 D. There is Vy initial. Why did I put an initial on the Vy, but not put one on the X? Which one? Okay? And so if the acceleration horizontally is 0, then Vx equals Vx initial equals Vx final equals Vx middle equals... So I'm lazy. I want to reinforce that this is the one that's changing. Hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. Let's find Vx first. Which trig function? Which trig function? Cosine, loud and proud, with authority in your voice, because you know it. So I think you're going to get cosine of 35 equals the x over 100. Cassidy, how would I get the Vx by itself? Now, by the way, if you wanted to be uber accurate, rather than calculating this in your t-chart, you could just write that Vx is going to be 100 cos 35. And every time you need to pull out Vx, rather than typing in the number on your calculator, you would just type 100 cos 35, because that would be rounded off to like 90 decimal places, that would, or 100 sig figs, or whatever your calculator is set at. But let's crunch it. 100 cos 35, I get 81.9152. I'll carry extra sig figs because I'm going to use this. The 2 is a nice place to stop because there's a 0 right after it. So 81.9152. I can also find Vx, Vy, which I'm pretty sure is sine. Nicole says times by 100 again. Yeah. I think Vx is going to be, Vy initial. You could also here write 100 sine 35, but let's just crunch the number. It's going to be 100 sine 35. 57.3576. Okay. You'll notice I really haven't just started solving anything but slanty components. Let's go to my t-chart. I can fill in both of these A's, can I not? What's the horizontal acceleration? What's the vertical acceleration? Negative 9.8. Hayden, my friend, how many pieces of information do I have right here? Count. How many do I have here? Not enough. What do they want me to find in part A? Reading. Time to what? Again, you're right. Time to what? Top suggests vertical. At least, because right now I don't know how I'm going to solve this. That suggests a vertical approach. So I'm going to guess. I'm going to put part A right here. I'm going to say T equals question mark. But still, I only have two things. Or do I? Is there a third thing that I know? Cassidy, enlighten me with your wisdom and brilliance. What was that? Vy final at the top. I got to be careful because Vf is not 0 at the top. It's still moving sideways. But vertically, components are independent. You're telling me, and you'd be right. So Cassidy, I'm looking for an equation that has A, Vi, Vf, and T in it. I think it's the old standby, the one that we used the most last year, isn't it? Which you may want to have your formula machine. I don't know. Could you get the T by itself for me, kiddo? Nice. Vf, 0 minus Vi, 57.3576, or if you want it to be uber accurate, 100 sine 35 could be plugged right in there, but I'll go 57.3576 divided by negative 9.8 time to top equals, oh, I'll use my answer button, bracket 0 minus answer button divided by negative 9.8. To get to the top, it's going to take 5.85282. You know what? On the off chance that I'm going to use this, I'll write it first to like 5 sig figs, but then since this is an answer, I'll round off to 3 for my final answer. So I'm going to go 5.85282. But really, that's going to be 5.85 seconds. Cool. Hayden, what's part B want me to find? Total flight time. Can anybody see? There is a way we can do this almost in our head. In fact, you can do it in your head if you're good at adding decimal numbers. But there is a way we can get this pretty easily. Anyone see how we can get the total time of flight? You're on a roll. What was that, Cassidy? I'm on a roll too. I've got your name right like a couple of times in a row. God. Multiply what by 2? Now the only reason that works is, are we starting on the ground? Are we ending on the ground? What goes up must come down. Then we can just double the time. Okay? So B, the easiest way, time flight is going to be 5.85282 times 2. I get 11.7056. 11.7056, and then Nicole, I'll round off to 11.7. Don't forget the units. I'll put a box. There's my final answer. Can anyone think of a way that we could have got this if we hadn't done part A first? Part A, can I find time of flight without doing part A? I can. I'll even give you a hint with this same equation right here by tweaking it. Derek. V final is negative 57.3576. If you wanted to get total time of flight in one fell swoop, negative 57.3576 minus 57.3576 divided by negative 9.8. I'll bet you that also is 0.705. That's kind of clever. I would do that if I hadn't done part A, because I'm lazy. Anybody see another way that we could find time? You don't need to write this down. This is just to let you know we have lots of options. Where VI is 57.3576, where A is 9.8, so negative 9.8, so half of A is that. How high are you when you started in this question? I heard it. 0. How high are you when you finish in this question? What's your displacement vertically in this question? You could solve that quadratic equation with the quadratic formula, and that'll also give you time. That's the worst way to do it, but it works. Sorry, that's the worst way to do it unless you have a built-in quadratic solver on your calculator and are very good at using it and can happily go there and solve it. But it works. I wouldn't do it that way, but it works. Good. Stephen, what's part C want me to find? Range. That's horizontal. So I'll do that over here. C. My abbreviation for range is dx. Wait a minute, Mr. Duick, you can't because you only know 1, 2 things, and you said you need 3 things. I only know two things. Or do I? Oh! I know total time of flight. It's 11.7056. Common mistake, kids use time up, and they say that's the total time of flight. Nope. That'll give you half the range. I'm looking for an equation that has V, A, T, and D in it. Wait a minute, Mr. Dewick. Don't bother writing that. Oh, why don't I need to write the half AT squared? And I'll just remind myself, horizontal, horizontal. Make sure I put the right stuff in there. This seems to be the question where, for some reason, kids want to put the 100 in for V, not the component. I don't know why. Maybe because it's a nice round number. No, it's going to be 81.9152 times 11.7056. 81.9152. If you, again, really wanted to be as accurate, as little rounding as possible, Sarah, you could type 100 cos 35 instead of 81.9152 times, I'm going to use my answer button, 959 meters. Okay. So those are some questions that I ground at an angle. The toughest questions, by far, are when you take that angle, and you take it off the ground and onto a cliff. Like here. Turn the page. To find the flight time for a projectile launched off of a cliff at an angle is the most difficult. There are several strategies. Method 1. You could find time to top, Vy final will be 0. Then let Vy initial be 0 right here and find time to bottom. Not wild about that. Strategy 2. You can do it all at once. Strategy 3. You could find time to top, Vy final is 0. Double it. Figure out how fast you're going right there, and then figure out how long it'll take to fall that distance, and then add all 3. Really not recommended, but doable. I'm a let's do it all at once kind of guy. Rip the Band-Aid off. Get it done. But it's going to require the quadratic formula. Or a workaround that has an easy thing to forget. So I can show you ways to do this. One requires the quadratic formula. I'm not sure if in your country they use the quadratic formula or they use a different method. There's 2 methods that I've seen coming out of Europe to solve quadratics. So I'll get back to you 2 later. But this begs the question. For a candy, without looking at their formula sheet, can anybody rattle off the quadratic formula? I'll give you a hint. X equals. Who knows the quadratic formula? No one. Derek is right. X equals negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4c all of j. I botched it. Hang on, I can do it faster. X equals negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4c all of j. Anybody say it faster than that? Anyone say it backwards? A2 overall, CA4 minus square B root square negative plus B negative equals X. Oh, thank you. I always have a soft spot for the quadratic formula because I have a math degree, and when I used to teach math, I would tell kids that the quadratic formula was as close as you came in math to Shakespearean iambic pentameter. It was as close as you got to art because it was unique. We've known the quadratic formula is used to solve equations that's got a squared in them, right? We've known about the quadratic formula for 700 years-ish, maybe longer. And ever since we knew that one, the logical question was, well, if there's a formula that solves any squared equation, is there a formula that solves any cubed? Is there a cubic formula? Is there a quartic formula? Is there an equation that will solve an x to the fifth? And hundreds of years were spent looking by mathematicians. And it was only in about, I think I'm going to go on from memory, 1890-ish, a mathematician proved that you cannot find a formula for anything above degree 2. The quadratic equation is unique. Now, having said that, you don't have to memorize it. Instead, of course, it's on your formula sheet. It is on your formula sheet on the back page right here. It does say x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I'm botching it. Usually I'm better than that. How many of you have a quadratic solver on your calculator? How many of you don't know if you have a quadratic solver on your calculator? Okay? If you have one, I am fine if you use it. And I'll show you how. So having said that, let's jump into a question. Example 10. We're going to finish with this. Example 10. Really? Ah! Here we go. Wait for it. Is there a cliff? First of all, is there an angle? This is a job for components. Is there a cliff? This is as tough as it gets. Okay? Well, you know what? You know what? Federico, what does it want me to find? Time. Time. In fact, I've often said you'll spend most of your time finding time. So we're going to find time. Before I even get that far, is there a slanty? Let's do components. Let's do components right next to the question. So I'm going to go here's Vy initial. Here's Vx. Hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent, I think, yes? Which trig function finds Vx? Cosine. In the interest of cutting corners, I think we're going to get this. Ariel, I think we're going to get cosine of 30 equals Vx over divided by 50 times the 50 over. Just to cut corners, I'm going to go straight to this, Ariel. Vx is going to be 50 cos 30. And I think Vy is going to be 50 sine 30. In fact, that one I can do in my head. I have long since memorized the sine of 30 is a half. This is a half of 50. This one works out to 25. You know what? I think I can do the top one in my head as well, because I actually know the cosine of 30 is 0.866. So 50 times 0.866 is going to be 40 plus 3, 43. 43.3-ish. I want to be more accurate than that. How good am I? Am I pretty good? Ooh! Doing trig in my head now. Oh, yeah. I should be getting an award. I'm going to go 43.301. Carry some extra sig figs. The 25, though, I think works out dead even. Yes? Yeah, I know it does. Okay. Have we got our components? What's our next strategy? T-chart, T-table, whatever you want to call it. Let's break it up. So I'm going to go horizontal, vertical, and I can write down the two things that I hardly have to think about. AX 0, AY negative 9.8. Oh, why don't I drop the components down too? Vy initial is 25. Vx is 43.301. What else do I know from the question? I think this one you have to get from the diagram. What else? Okay, it's vertical, yes. And you're right, we're going to have to let it be negative because it ends up below from where I started from. And now, Jilin, can you see I have 3 things in the vertical column, which means here is how I'm going to find time. I'm looking for an equation that has those in it. You know what? It's the quadratic equation. The d equals bit plus a half at squared. That's the quadratic. D equals VIT 1/2 AT squared. But if we actually plug the numbers in, it's going to be negative 60 equals 25T. What's A vertically? Negative 9. What's half of that? Is it okay? I'm going to do it in my head. You get negative 4.9 T squared. I've done that one so often. If I was teaching math, Hayden, right now, I would pause and I would say, what kind of an equation is this? And my students all would say, quadratic. And I would say, how do you know? And they would say, because it's got a squared. Because you did last year learn, I think you added like 5 or 6 different equations to your repertoire. You added quadratics, absolute values, I think, square root. So the first step is, you better figure out what kind of an equation it is, Renzo, so you know what strategy to use. So, Renzo, what kind of an equation is this? How do you know? So here's the question. How did you solve the quadratic? What was the first thing you had to do before you did anything else? Had to make it equal to 0. Now, this next bit is not on any textbook. It's not a rule. This is Mr. Dewick having done this wrong so many times. I have learned, Hannah, over the years that I'm more likely to make a mistake if the quadratic term is negative. I don't know why, but I am. So even though it would be easiest to plus the 60 over, since I'm doing it all in my head anyhow, Cassidy, I'm going to plus that and minus personal preference. I'm going to get positive 4.9 T squared minus 25 T minus 60 equals 0. Remember the quadratic formula had A, B, and C? What's A in this question? What's B in this question? Negative 25. What's C in this question? Now, you've all had me, except for my newcomers this year, long enough to know that I like to be organized but lazy. So I know some teachers, like, they would, don't write this down, they would make you write A equals B equals, yeah. I want to be organized and lazy. You know what? That's A. That's B, that's C. Write 3 letters, and I figure I can figure out what I'm getting at there. Now, or not, before or not, have you seen negative B plus or minus? Okay, so Germany does this a different way. The only thing, because I'm a nerd, I did put an X there, but what's our variable in this question? Marks off if you put an X there because you're so used to that, but it's a T for Pete's sakes. Now we pause. I'll stop the video for a second. So for those of us that don't have a built-in solver, T equals, what's negative B? Positive 25, because negative 25, plus or minus the square root of negative 25 squared minus 4 times 4.9 times negative 60 all over 2a. I can multiply by 2 in my head, 9.8. Yeah? Let me give you a little advice. I find, Shayna, before I go any further, it's worth just crunching that on my calculator, finding out what's inside the square root. So I tend to now go negative 25, close bracket, squared, minus 4 times 4.9 times negative 60. Now this one worked out evenly. If it didn't work out evenly, I'd probably carry it to like 5 or 6 sig figs if I could. Shana, you've had me before. Am I organized? So yes. But am I lazy? What did I get inside the square root? I'm not going to rewrite the whole thing. All right, now I'm actually going to solve. So it's going to be, Shana, is this a fraction? Is there more than one thing on the top? Brackets. Is there more than one thing on the bottom? I can be sloppy there. So I'm going to go bracket 25 plus the square root of 1801. Now my calculator, whenever I open a square root, automatically opens a bracket. So I've got to close off the square root. Then I have to close off the top, divided by 9.8. And one of my roots, one of my values is 6.881447, that there. If I was using this to find something else, I'd probably carry 5 or 6 sig figs. But since this question only said find time, I'll go to 3 sig figs. The other value, this is why I went on my calculator rant last year. If you can just backspace and edit and change the plus sign to a minus sign, it sure is nicer than retyping the whole thing. The other value is negative 1.78 seconds. Which of these answers doesn't make sense? Negative 1.78. So, much like when Mateo phones a girl on a date, reject. Okay. It's always a basketball player. It was you or Jaden. Okay. Reject. By the way, if you're wondering, this actually does have a meaning. Put your pencils down, look up. If instead of the projectile going in this direction at 50 meters per second, 30 degrees above the horizontal, if it was going this way at 50 meters per second at a 30-degree angle below the horizontal, you want to know how long it would take for it to hit the ground? It would have needed to leave the ground 1.78 seconds ago to get to this location for the rest of this question to work. So it actually does have a meaning. It's not a completely nonsensical answer, but I never actually had to use that. And I only noticed that when I started mucking around with some numbers and just kind of, what does that mean? So hashtag nerd trivia. What does this question want us to find? Time of flight. Now that I know the time of flight, could I also put time in the horizontal column and find the range? Yeah. I have just given you what I call the ultimate vector kinematics review. These are the ultimate reviews. You'll get an ultimate forces review. You'll get an ultimate circuitry review. You'll get for each unit. These are always due the day of the test. And if you work through these, you will have seen 98% of all of the questions on the test. I will almost always, I think I told you at the beginning of the year, give you one multiple choice question that you've never seen before because I'm trying to teach you how to think on the fly. That's one of the skills I want to build in. What do I do when I don't know what to do? Slanty, I'll try components. Forces, this is a job for a free body diagram. This is the reason why I teach the way I do, okay? However, on my website, what's my website? pitmath.com. On my website, come here. Come on, computer. Here we go. pitmath.com. Yes? Just hang on. Physics 12. Have patience for the slow network. What I have on my website is both a blank copy of this, but I have a handwritten showing all my steps. What block are you guys? Block D? Come on, computer. Come on, Bing. Wow, this is painful. If you click on blocked, you know what? I'll just show you the actual file. Answer key that shows all of my steps. The rule in my class is if you have a question from the ultimate review, I will always reply back to you. Have you gone online and looked at my showing all my steps? Because often you'll be able to figure it out at the square root. And you'll remember that way better than me telling you, hey, you forgot the square root. Boy, this is taking a painfully long time. Too many things open in the background. Oh, and now it's going to be nice and small because that's what I want, right? Jeez. Click. Fit width. Longer than I planned. So for any questions that require work, you will see I have showing all my work, showing diagram, handwritten answer key. Now this is not, I'm not giving you any new homework. Instead, here is what I'm going to tell you. On this document, you can circle the following questions as you are able to do these now, and you can spend trying these questions. You can circle number 1. You're going to end up doing them all, but number 1. Number 2. You can do number 3. You can do number 4. Circle these right on there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn the page. You can do number 6. You can do number 8. You can do number 11. 13. 15. 17. 20. And 24. You do not have to do these right now. And just because you've circled those ones doesn't mean you don't do the other ones. It just means I haven't given you enough to do the other ones yet. Okay? They're pretty good. I've got lots of good feedback. Kids all over the province are using these and like, oh, they're great study guides. Yes, I will almost always tell you which one the nasty is on the test, by the way, Derek, since you asked. Okay? So we're going to pause there.